Tonight at 10, 3 become 2. Boris Johnson drops out of the race to be Tory leader and Prime Minister, leaving Rishi Sunak and Penny Mordaunt in the running. Mr Johnson said he got the required nominations, but says now is not the right time. Rishi Sunak is now the clear front-runner.
The latest twist in a week of many twists and turns has come in just the last hour, and it means we could have a new Prime Minister as soon as tomorrow.
We'll be asking what is now more likely, a contest or a coronation? Also on the programme. Cementing his place at the top, China's President Xi will have a third term in power, the first to do so since Chairman Mao.
Rosie Gallagher, no! Hat-trick!
And England cruise past South Africa and into the quarter-finals of the Rugby Union World Cup. Good evening. The UK is tonight guaranteed to have its third new Prime Minister in 3 months after Boris Johnson declared in the last hour that he will not run, despite claiming to have had enough MPs nominating him. It leaves the way clear for the former Chancellor Rishi Sunak, who today formally entered the race and who is presently the clear front-runner. He joins the Leader of the Commons, Penny Mordaunt, in the contest. Well, our political editor, Chris Mason, broke the news of Boris Johnson pulling out a few minutes ago, and he joins me here now. Chris, we've been hearing all weekend that Boris Johnson had the nomination, so this announcement is quite the surprise.
He has spent the entire weekend just where he delights in being, which is at the centre of attention, asking the very question that has hung over the air at Westminster for the best part of 20 years, on and off, which is what will Boris Johnson do next. So he spent the weekend speaking to lots of Conservative MPs, flew back from the Caribbean in order to do so. But what was increasingly striking was that he wasn't gathering much momentum. Now, he says tonight he had cleared the threshold in order to stand tomorrow. It's something of a vintage Boris Johnson statement actually published in the last hour, in which he says that he thinks he could have won and he thinks he could have led the Conservatives to victory at the next general election. But crucially, whether or not he had cleared the threshold, and he insists that he had, he wasn't gathering enough momentum to be able to make the case that he could bring his party back together. And the lesson of Liz Truss of the last 6 or 7 weeks is, it doesn't really matter how popular you are amongst Conservative Party members in the country. If the party at Westminster is not behind you, you are very, very quickly going to hit trouble. And of course, Boris Johnson was facing a parliamentary inquiry into whether he had misled Parliament over all of those allegations about parties in Downing Street when he was Prime Minister. So an astonishing twist in the last hour after yet another astonishing day.
Are you running for the leadership, Mr Sunak?
Could September's loser be October's Prime Minister? Rishi Sunak is a step closer to Downing Street tonight. Beaten by Liz Truss just weeks ago, he could replace her as soon as tomorrow. Declaring his candidacy today, he wrote, "I am standing to be your next Prime Minister and leader of the Conservative Party. I want to fix our economy, unite our party and deliver for the country." He also felt the need to say, "There will be integrity, professionalism and accountability at every level of government I lead, and I will work day in, day out to get the job done." Throughout the day, the public support for Mr Sunak among Tory MPs has continued to tick up. This minister reckons Boris Johnson would be a guaranteed disaster.
What we can't do is have him in as Prime Minister in circumstances where he's bound to implode, taking down the whole government with him, and we just can't do that again. But equally, I'm not willing to lay down my integrity for Boris Johnson. I'm not. And we'll have to see what any vote is. But really, I want Rishi to win.
Mr Baker had backed the former Home Secretary Suella Braverman for the job in the summer. Today, she backed Rishi Sunak too, saying, "I have backed Boris from the start, but we are in dire straits now. We need unity, stability and efficiency. Rishi is the only candidate that fits the bill, and I'm proud to support him." Boris Johnson said absolutely nothing publicly about whether he'd stand until an hour ago. Instead, he had a weekend of attempted telephonic charming. And then at 9 o'clock this evening, a statement. In the last few days, I've been overwhelmed by the number of people who suggested I should once again contest the Conservative Party leadership. I believe I am well placed to deliver a Conservative victory in 2024. And tonight I can confirm that I have cleared the very high hurdle of 102 nominations, including a proposer and a seconder. And I could put my nomination in tomorrow. There is a very good chance that I would be successful in the election with Conservative Party members and that I could indeed be back in Downing Street on Friday. But in the course of the last days, I have sadly come to the conclusion that this would simply not be the right thing to do. You can't govern effectively unless you have a united party in Parliament. All weekend the clock had been ticking, even the business secretary's personalised one. Mr Johnson struggled to gain momentum, but Jacob Rees-Mogg explained this morning why he deserves support.
Boris delivered Brexit. He supported Ukraine, and standing up to Russia was the first world leader to do that, and he got us through a pandemic. He won a majority of 80. He won Hartlepool in a by-election. He has been the greatest electoral asset the Conservative Party has had in modern times.
And here was the Foreign Secretary James Cleverly endorsing Mr Johnson this afternoon. I know Boris has learnt lessons from his time in Number 10 and will ensure the focus is on the needs of the country from day one. I will be supporting him to return to the role of PM. This election for our next Prime Minister excludes the best part of 70 million people and currently involves around 360 people, Conservative MPs. And it's been rather noisy.
Rishi, in my judgment, is the one candidate who's in a position, to pull the party together.
Yes, I'm supporting Boris Johnson in this election. That level of MP support, which is growing by the hour for Rishi Sunak.
I haven't come down publicly. I'm mulling things over privately.
Hopefully Boris Johnson will be the next Prime Minister.
Penny Mordaunt is the one.
And yes, enter the one candidate happy to face questions today, Penny Mordaunt, although she wasn't particularly keen on answering many of them directly.
Yes or no, do you stand by that? You said it a couple of weeks ago.
I'm not. You're trying very hard, Laura. Well,
she trails behind the others, but says it's important to keep going.
I am very confident about the progress we are making, and I will say to you that I'm in this to win it.
Some of the things that we want to do as an incoming...
Opposition parties say it's time for a general election.
Let the public in to decide, do they want to continue with this utter chaos, or do they want stability under a Labour government?
Tonight, the latest twist in the career of Boris Johnson after a weekend at the centre of attention. With this former Prime Minister out and off the stage, for now at least, are we looking right now at the next Prime Minister? Rishi Sunak could be walking through a rather different door very soon.
Chris, help us out here, because Boris Johnson says he got the required 100 nominations, but he's pulled out. Why?
I think in the end he has concluded that whilst he claims he had cleared the threshold in order to make the ballot paper and potentially have a contest against Rishi Sunak, that simply wouldn't have been enough. In other words, looking at the balance of opinion within the Conservative Parliamentary Party, it was tilting definitively in Rishi Sunak's direction. That's likely to have meant, in a contest between the two of them, Boris Johnson numerically would have been proven to be the second most popular. Now, in a contest of two, he could have taken that to the country, but the accusation that would have come from his critics was that he was doing that in his own personal interest to further his own ambition at a time of huge instability, and wouldn't it be better that an alternative Prime Minister was in Downing Street sooner rather than later, particularly given that he only left a matter of weeks ago himself under a huge cloud and as a result of his own party kicking him out. Now, he might have wanted to argue, well, look, no, democracy is a popularity contest, and I think I can win against the went up against the Rishi Sunak in front of the members of the party. And when you read his statement tonight, as you heard there in my report, that is the essence of what he is saying. But that will forever remain a hypothetical. And crucially, I think, from Mr Johnson's point of view psychologically, by bowing out now, he doesn't lose. Clearly he doesn't win, but he isn't defeated in the eyes of any electorate, i.e. either the electorate of the Conservative Parliamentary Party or that of party members.
So, two of them left in the race, Rishi Sunak and Penny Mordaunt. Sunak with many more declared nominations than Penny Mordaunt. Are we looking at a coronation here?
Yeah, quite possibly we are, because Penny Mordaunt is miles off at the moment the publicly declared total that she would need of hitting 100. And now there are some heading to her tonight. So Michael Fabricant, Conservative backbencher who backed Boris Johnson, is backing Penny Mordaunt. Incidentally, Nadeem Zahawi, who's the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, has said that he's now going to back Rishi Sunak, having backed Boris Johnson. So it seems a tall order for Penny Mordaunt to clear that threshold and make this a contest. But let's wait and see. She is still in that contest. If she doesn't make the threshold, then Rishi Sunak will be our next Prime Minister. And it's my understanding tonight that the King will be in London tomorrow evening, should at that time he need to perform his constitutional duty of seeing a Prime Minister as they resign and inviting another one because they think he can form a majority in the House of Commons, which is how constitutionally the system works.
If that does happen, Chris, what sort of Prime Minister will Rishi Sunak be?
So Rishi Sunak, we got a flavour of this, didn't we, over the summer? He's the MP for Richmond in North Yorkshire. He was an advocate of Brexit when it wasn't the popular cause necessarily at the top of the Conservative Party at the time. David Cameron and George Osborne tried to persuade him otherwise. He was a committed Brexiteer. I think his economic vision will be relatively similar to what we've seen from Jeremy Hunt, the relatively new Chancellor, since he took over just a matter of days ago. Although it would be interesting to see how Rishi Sunak formulates a government. He emphasises a need for stability, but how many of the current cabinet stay in post, how many of more junior ministers stay in post, and to what extent is there a movement around? He will face then colossal challenges, if indeed it turns out to be him. So many of the problems that Liz Truss faced, Rishi Sunak will face, not least the massive one of legitimacy. Plenty of people will look in on what's been going on in the last couple of weeks and conclude that it's a little on the absurd side. Liz Truss faced the problem of having not won a mandate herself from the electorate in the way that Boris Johnson did. Rishi Sunak will face that same problem and a clamour from the opposition parties that there ought to be a general election. Now, only a Prime Minister and or his party can bring about that election sooner rather than later. Constitutionally, they can continue serving until the Parliament runs out. But politically and morally, the opposition parties, I think, will step up their campaign that there ought to be an election sooner rather than later, given we will be on to our third Prime Minister of 2022.
Chris, more from you later in the programme, but for the time being, thank you very much. Our political editor, Chris Mason, there. And you can keep up to date with all the latest on the leadership race on BBC News Online. That is bbc.co.uk/news, and also by using the BBC News app. Now, in other news, the former governor of the Bank of England, Sir Mervyn King, has said the UK faces a more difficult era of austerity than the one which followed the financial crisis in 2008. He said it was time to front up with the public about the difficulties that the country is now facing.
The challenge is, if we want European levels of welfare payments and public spending, you cannot finance that with American levels of tax rates. So we may need to confront the need to have significantly higher taxes on the average person. There isn't enough money there amongst the rich.
Vladimir Putin has congratulated China's leader Xi Jinping on securing his third term in office. His position was ratified at the Communist Party's Congress in Beijing. His re-election breaks with a decades-long tradition that limits the service of Chinese leaders to 2 terms, as our China correspondent Stephen McDonnell reports.
Xi Jinping led out China's new leadership team in order of rank, with him at the top. It confirmed one of the world's worst-kept secrets, that he'd officially broken the mould in place for decades, limiting party bosses to 2 terms in power, lest anyone become too strong. It would have taken a bold conference delegate to oppose this move, which leaves Mr. Xi at the helm for as long as he likes.
China is embarking on a long journey filled with glory and dreams. The roadmap has been drawn and the bugle has been sounded.
Again, there were no women on the 7-person Politburo Standing Committee, the group at the top of China's governance system, now stacked with Xi loyalists.
Comrade Li Qiang
The appointment of Li Qiang as Premier will concern some. He oversaw the disastrous months-long Shanghai lockdown with significant food shortages. Now Mr. Li is in charge of managing China's economy.
I think the appointment of Li Qiang as the Premier shows that Xi Jinping is not principally interested in the economy. He's never really been interested in the economy except as a political tool.
China's new leadership faces exploding youth unemployment and a massive property crisis. They also have to generate economic activity while implementing strict zero-COVID lockdowns. Xi Jinping and his team have pledged to tackle these problems with ideological unity and nationalist zeal. Well, many will wonder if that's going to be enough.
I don't care whether Xi's in a third term, so long as we have food.
Putin's had 4 terms and 16 years. Now Xi is imitating him.
The mysterious removal of China's former leader at the end of the Communist Party Congress led to speculation that this was a symbolic step to ram home the transition with Xi Jinping in charge. It's also possible, though, that Hu Jintao may not be well. He appeared confused, yet questions remain about the timing of this departure in front of the cameras. Today, though, there was no sign of the influence of leaders gone by, and, crucially, no identifiable successors to Xi in this new group. Another indication he could remain in power for a long time. Stephen McDonnell, BBC News, Beijing.
Time for all the sport now. Here's Lizzie Greenwood-Hughes at the BBC Sports Centre. Liz.
Thank you, Rita. Good evening. England's women once again showed their dominance at the Rugby Union World Cup with another huge win, this time 75-0 against South Africa. They're now guaranteed a place in the quarter-finals along with Wales. Our reporter Joe Curry was watching in Auckland.
Stepping out in the Auckland sunshine, with their place in the quarter-finals already secure, for England, this match was all about winning the group. And such was their strength in depth, they made 13 changes to their starting 15. One of those coming in, Rosie Gallagher, got England off the mark early on, the driving maul eventually crashing over the line. Quickly, England started to pull away in the first half, dotting down 4 more times. The bonus point secured as they headed in at the break. After the restart, there was no let-up from the world number ones as their try count continued to tot up. Gallagher touching down her 3rd of the game, a hat-trick on her World Cup debut, and a moment to remember. And she wasn't the only one to impress. Connie Powell also notching up 3 tries. That's their 28th consecutive win, form they'll need to continue as they now head into the knockout stages.
I'm super proud of the girls. They were clinical when we needed to. With the game, we needed to ride the game out at the beginning. Like, South Africa had nothing to lose. They were going to come hard at us, and that's what they did. Fantastic result for us.
Well, England have cruised through this group stage, but standing in their way next is a familiar foe, as next weekend they take on Australia in the quarter-finals. The Red Roses will start as favourites, but it is a rivalry where sparks nearly always fly. Joe Curry, BBC News, Auckland.
Match of the Day 2 is on after the news, but if you don't want to wait, here come the day's football headlines. And Southampton ended Arsenal's winning run, holding the Premier League leaders to a 1-1 draw. Arsenal are now only 2 points ahead of Manchester City. Elsewhere, there were wins for Aston Villa, Fulham, Leicester and Newcastle. Ireland face a seemingly impossible task to qualify for the knockout stages of the Rugby League World Cup. They lost their second pool match against Lebanon, which means they now have to beat the world number 1's New Zealand to reach the quarter-finals. India's extraordinary win over Pakistan in their opening group game at the T20 World Cup today is being hailed as one of the best ever. A record crowd in Melbourne watched India needing 13 off the final 3 balls to somehow defy the odds and beat their arch rivals with the last delivery of the game. That's the sport. Back to you, Rita.
Thank you, Lizzie.
I'm the Doctor. At its peak, more than 13 million people watched David Tennant as the Time Lord. Many thought he was just returning for a quick cameo, but no, the hugely popular Doctor is properly coming back.
Did you miss me?
17 years after his first appearance.
New teeth. That's weird.
A lovely, lovely thing to get to revisit something that was such a wonderful, happy, significant time in my life, and you move on from it with a whole mixture of emotions, and one of those is sadness and regret. So to be able to revisit that and to get another shot, it was a total joy from start to finish.
His 2008 co-star Catherine Tate,
I can't believe I'm doing this,
and head writer Russell T Davies,
marvellous, yes,
who brought the show back in 2005, have also returned. Of course, popular characters who appear to have permanently left their roles have come back before.
Hello, Princess.
From Dirty Den in EastEnders to Bobby Ewing in the 80s soap Dallas.
Was there any sense of worry that if it doesn't perform quite as well or up to expectations, it might take the gloss off how people see you as the Time Lord?
It didn't really feel like a risk. I knew that Russell T Davies was in charge, and I love working with him, and I love receiving a script with his name on the front. So that just felt like it was a bit of a no-brainer, really.
Towards the end of next year, he'll hand over to Ncuti Gatwa.
Someone tell me what the hell is going on here.
Scarily good, brilliant. I think the world has got a very exciting new Doctor to look forward to, once you've enjoyed this one for a little while longer.
And so many fans will be delighted a favourite Doctor is back. Lisa Mazimba, BBC News.
Back now to our top story and the news that Boris Johnson will not run in the Conservative Party leadership race. Chris Mason, our political editor, is back again. Any reaction, Chris?
The news comes at quite a pace, doesn't it, at the moment, not least for Conservative MPs who were proudly backing Boris Johnson. Take a look at this. One of his supporters, or I should say now former supporters, David Morris.
I was on the meeting with Boris and the team not so long ago, within the past hour. And I've got to say that I was absolutely flabbergasted. It's just one of those occasions where you just don't believe it's really happening. However, look, I'll say it like it is. It's time for grown-ups. I'm back in Rishi.
Guests are being flabbered at quite a rate at the moment, and who knows what might be around the corner. What I can tell you tonight, Reeta, is that Penny Mordaunt's campaign are saying that she is still running to be leader of the Conservative Party and making the argument that she is the unifying candidate most likely to keep the different wings of the Conservative Party together. So we still have a contest tonight. We can't be certain it'll be a coronation, but Penny Mordaunt has one heck of a lot of catching up to do. One other thing worth mentioning, it's my understanding that the King is in London tomorrow evening, so were it to be a coronation and were it to be Rishi Sunak, if he wanted to arrive in Downing Street in the light for those images that make history and get repeated over and over again, it may be Tuesday before that were to happen. But then who knows, as I say, maybe we have a contest and it doesn't happen until Friday. Either way, I predict an interesting week.
Yet another one. Chris, many thanks. Chris Mason there. OK, time for a look at the weather now. Here's Darren Bett.
Thanks very much, Rita. It's been a very lively day of weather as well. And with the last of the sunshine here, it was a very colourful end to the day in southern England. To get a rainbow, you need rain. And briefly, we had a lot of it that led to some flooded streets. This was the band of rain from earlier on. And for a while, we had some thunderstorms in there as well. Those have moved away out into the North Sea as that rain moves northwards. This was the rain that started the day in southern England. It's now in Scotland, where it's been for a while. It's moving very slowly northwards. Following that, we'll see some further bursts of rain that could be heavy and thundery across England and Wales, windy through the Channel. The winds tending to ease in the west as the rain tends to move away from here. But with all the wet weather around, it will be a very mild start to tomorrow. We've still got some rain to clear away from overnight from eastern parts of England. That'll move away into the North Sea, and that rain is still there, moving slowly northwards across Scotland. It'll be followed by some west to southwesterly winds that will bring a mixture of sunshine and bog standard showers, really. Scattered showers in the west, a few getting blown to eastern parts of England and Scotland, but there will be some sunshine around as well. And it's still mild. Temperatures could reach 15 in Scotland, 17 or 18 for southeastern parts of England. This is the general weather pattern really through the rest of the week. This is the jet stream, the upper level winds. You can see how buckled that jet stream is to the west of the UK. And with that sort of pattern within that buckle, you get areas of low pressure spinning around, which tend to bring us most of the rain. And because of the orientation of the jet stream, we're on the milder side of it. So our winds are coming from a long way south, bringing us those higher temperatures. And really through the rest of the week, it remains on the mild side. Could see temperatures 20 or 21 degrees later in the week across some eastern parts of England. By then, most of the rain, still heavy at times, will be towards the west. Back to you, Rita.
Darren, thank you. And that is all from us at BBC News at 10. The news continues here on BBC One, as now it's time to join our colleagues across the nations and regions for the news where you are. Have a very good night. Bye-bye.